Coming up on today's show, we are talking free agent quarterback targets for Sean Payton and the Broncos because after benching Russell Wilson, I just don't see a way they can bring him back in 2024. Mom and dad will be fighting all season long. The quarterback-head coach relationship is completely fractured. So the Broncos are going to have to either go to the draft, trade, or free agency, or roll with Jarrett Stidham, I suppose. But that doesn't seem like it's going to get a whole lot of butts and seats for 2024. Now, I don't think that the Broncos are going to sign a quarterback. I don't think it's very likely, at least sign a starting quarterback. But I think there is a path where ultimately the Broncos are faced with one option, and that is going to free agency to find a 2024 starting QB. If the Broncos win in Week 18, finish the year 9-8, which I am all for winning football games, that is the number one goal, they might put themselves way too far out of range to trade up for Caleb Williams, Drake May, or Jaden Daniels. The Panthers gave up an arm and a leg last year to get to number one, and that was from the number 9 spot. Imagine what it would cost to go from 15, 16, 17, even 18, all the way to number one. And so if they can't get in range to trade up for one of those top 3 guys, and maybe they don't fall in love with Michael Penix, right? He had 2 torn ACLs at Indiana. That is a concern for a lot of teams. Maybe the medicals don't check out, and ultimately the Broncos go, we're not finding a starting quarterback in round 1. Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy, they are not our guys. So now we're left with one option, free agency. And so now I'm going to go through the most viable free agent targets, and disclaimer, there's not a lot of good ones. Now, there are 2 pretty good free agent quarterbacks on the market this upcoming offseason, Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield. I don't think either guy is going to leave their respective team. The Minnesota Vikings learned this year how bad they do need Kirk Cousins. If there were Vikings fans that wanted to move on from Kirk a few years ago, they learned the hard way this year how valuable Kirk is. I think he's going to return to Minnesota. I think the Bucs found their next franchise QB potentially, at least for the short term, in Baker Mayfield after Tampa won 8 games in a year where they thought they would just be rebuilding and trying to just stay somewhat competitive. They are now 1 win away on Sunday from hosting a playoff game. I don't think they burn the boats and move on from Baker. So don't hold your breath on either of these guys being available to the Broncos. So with that all being said, let's check out some guys that may be available to the Broncos in free agency, beginning with Gardner Minshew, the former Wazoo quarterback that has just taken the NFL by storm ever since he came in the league. He has been the Colts starting quarterback for pretty much all of 2023. Anthony Richardson was injured a little bit early on and then suffered that season-ending shoulder injury. And ever since then, it has been Gardner Minshew. And when you look at his stats this year, they might not be eye-popping numbers, but don't go talk to Colts fans. Like, Gardner Minshew has been a huge reason for this team even being in a playoff spot right now going into the final week of the season. You could do a lot worse than Gardner Minshew. And again, if you find yourself, and if the Broncos find themselves in a position of signing Gardner Minshew, clearly not a lot of things went to plan. But I do believe Minshew has played himself into a starting role for 2024. I'm not quite sure where that will be, but I think we saw this year that Gardner Minshew is a top 32 quarterback in the National Football League. So whether it is maybe coming back to Indianapolis to help Anthony Richardson or going somewhere else, I think Gardner Minshew will be a starting quarterback. And if things don't go to plan, whatever, and I don't know what the plan is for Denver at quarterback in 2024, Minshew could be a very realistic free agent target. Now, make sure you are subscribed to the channel because this is going to be the, holy grail of off seasons for the Broncos, right? Moving on from Russell Wilson potentially, finding a new quarterback maybe in the draft or God knows where else. So I don't want you to miss a thing. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel and help us reach 20,000 subscribers if you have not already. Second free agent quarterback is Jamus Winston. Now, there is an obvious connection between Jamus Winston and Sean Payton, right? Sean Payton brought Jameis in from Tampa to back up Drew Brees. Some thought Jamus Winston would be the ultimate understudy for Drew Brees and take over for him. That really did not go to plan as the Saints went and got Derek Carr. But Jameis, in 20 games with the Saints, he has unfortunately battled injuries and he was benched last year and into this year. But 2,300 yards, 20 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. He got off to a really good start with the Saints when he took over as a starter after Drew Brees retired. And then, unfortunately, he tore his ACL. And then last year, there was Jameis and Andy Dalton, and they ultimately stuck with Andy Dalton even when Jameis was healthy. And now this year, they've got Derek Carr. But don't lose sight of Sean Payton was a big fan of Jameis Winston, and maybe he views Jameis as a next best option, maybe even a step above what Russell Wilson can do in Sean Payton's offense since Jameis has some experience in it. This screams to me plan B, right? I'm not quite sure what plan A is for Sean Payton. If I knew, I'd be, I don't know, a much more wealthier YouTuber right now. But ultimately, plan A for the Broncos is probably go get to whoever their dream quarterback is in the draft. But plan B might be Jameis Winston because I just don't see a way Sean Payton brings back Russell Wilson after benching him the last 2 games. So let me know who the better quarterback is, Jameis Winston or Gardner Minshew. I'm kind of torn on these two because they both have some pros. Like, Jameis is just Jameis. It's so much fun to watch. You take the highs with the lows, but Gardner Minshew is not very far off from Jameis Winston. So let me know who the quarterback is you'd rather have in the on the Broncos sideline next season. I would lean towards Gardner Minshew. He's got just more experience recently, and overall, I think he's got much higher lows than Jameis Winston because Jameis 30 for 30, 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions. It's not a graceful ending. Third free agent quarterback target is Joe Flacco. Holy shitballs. Did not think we would be talking about Joe Flacco. But here we are at the end of the 2023 season, and Joe Flacco appears to be a front runner for NFL Comeback Player of the Year. 1,600 yards for the Browns ever since Deshaun Watson went down. Flacco stepped in, and he has done a tremendous job for Cleveland. 13 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He is looking the best he has ever looked. Basically the best he has played since going to the Super Bowl over 10 years ago. Now, of course, there is the elephant in the room, and that is, wait a minute, I know this guy, and that is Joe Flacco, the Broncos starting quarterback in 2019 who started 6 games, suffered a neck injury, was traded from the Ravens for a 4th-round pick, and ultimately 2 big factors were the downfall for Joe Flacco in Denver. 1, a neck injury. Not easy to overcome. Obviously, he was not playing super well before that neck injury, which leads me into factor number 2. Look what Cleveland has done with Joe Flacco. They have let him loose. They say you have the strongest arm potentially in the NFL. You're right there with Josh Allen and the rest of the big arms in the league. Air it out. That was something the Broncos did not do back with Joe Flacco in 2019. Maybe Sean Payton learns what Joe Flacco's strengths are and leans into them. I ultimately believe that as great of a run Joe Flacco is having right now, this is too risky of a move for Sean Payton. I mean, Sean Payton took this Broncos head coaching job, and he is basically commandeering the roster. He is overhauling it. He is moving on from Russell Wilson. And if you go to ownership and tell them, we need to pay this guy $85 million to get as far away as possible, you better have a good plan B for who's going to take over from Russell Wilson. And putting your eggs in a 39-year-old Joe Flacco basket is a very risky move for Sean Payton. I think it's too risky a move. Even if Joe Flacco takes the Browns on a deep playoff run, I just don't think Sean Payton is going to hitch his wagon to a 39-year-old Flacco, because if things don't work out, and if Flacco just caught lightning in a bottle for 2-3 months in Cleveland, and it wears out with a new city and a new team in Denver, man, who's going to be the fall guy? Sean Payton. Now, before we get on to the rest of our video, PrizePicks, our awesome sponsor, has a great deal for Broncos country, which I can't wait to share with you guys. Now, PrizePicks is super exciting and super easy to play, and it's my favorite way to take in daily fantasy sports. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types, PrizePicks is the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So we can actually throw up my selections for Week 18, as I've got some pretty bold ones, I'll say. CJ Stroud, in what's a playoff game more or less for the rookie QB, I'm taking the less. I think the moment might be too big for the rookie. I like the more on Drake London and Bijan Robinson for the Atlanta Falcons, as their head coach is in hot water. So what does that mean for Arthur Smith and the Falcons? Go to your star players. And then finally, I like the more on Jonathan Taylor at 80.5 rushing yards. Playoff game for the Colts on Saturday. Pound the rock with your star running back. Go to prizepicks.com/CLNS and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. The link for that is in the comments and description of today's video. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Now we move into the final tier of free agent QBs in 2024, Jacoby Brissett. So Brissett in 2022, when he started for a majority of the year before Deshaun Watson's suspension was up, played some really good football. 2,600 yards, 12 touchdowns. He might not have been spraying the ball all over the field, but he was smart with the football and he kept the Browns in a lot of close games. This year for Washington, we haven't seen a whole lot of Brissett up until recently when Ron Rivera decided to kind of pull the plug on Sam Howell. And ever since Brissett's somewhat taken over, he has played some great football. 224 yards, 3 touchdowns. Small sample size, but Brissett's showing that he still has it. I think Jacoby Brissett would be a placeholder. And unfortunately for him, that's sort of what he has been his entire NFL career. No one's really wanted to fall in love with Brissett, despite every fan base falling in love with him no matter where he's gone. He was well respected and well liked in Indianapolis. He was loved in Cleveland despite playing just a couple games, 12 games as a starter. And then in Washington now, Sam Howell's been the guy. But as of late, there have been some Brissett chants growing in Landover, Maryland. So if Sean Payton can't find his guy in the draft and he thinks Brissett for a lot less money can do better than what Russell Wilson did last year, he could be the 2024 Broncos starting quarterback. Option number 5, Sam Darnold. The once top 3 draft pick out of USC to the New York Jets is currently backing up Brock Purdy in San Francisco. And we all know that the Sam Darnold career has not gone to plan. Sub 60% completion percentage, 1,100 yards since entering the league in 2018, 62 touchdowns, 56 interceptions, and a career record of 21-34. Now, Sam Darnold was unfortunately a little bit of a product of playing for the New York Jets, where no quarterback has really had any success whatsoever since Broadway Joe back in Super Bowl II, Super Bowl III. But Sam Darnold, the last time we really saw him, which was in 2022 with the Carolina Panthers, where he made a handful of starts, he played some of his best ball, arguably. 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. I think we know who Sam Darnold is at this point in his career, and that is a really good backup quarterback that you would trust taking over if an injury popped up to the starter, but not someone you want to sink your teeth into for 17 games from August to December. So this is, in my eyes, Plan D for Sean Payton. Plan A is find your dream quarterback in the draft and get him. Plan B is, God knows, but maybe one of these free agents. Plan C is, we need to make Plan A or Plan B work. And then Plan D is Sam Darnold. So I am in no way advocating for Sam Darnold to be the Broncos quarterback of 2024. But we do have to acknowledge that there is a very low % chance Russell Wilson returns next year. And if Jarrett Stidham just flops in Week 18 against the Raiders and does not show anyone any reason to believe he should be the undoubted starter in 2024, and the Broncos don't secure their quarterback of the future in the draft because Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Jane Daniels all may very well go top 5, and if Michael Penix's 2 ACL injuries are too big of a hurdle for Denver to get over, and Bo Nix as a check-down Charlie, and J.J. McCarthy as a run-first quarterback, don't scream first-round pick to Denver, it might be one of those free agents. I have no idea what to expect this offseason. But let me know which QB you would sign. If you were calling the shots, would it be one of the, 7 quarterbacks we looked at today? I personally, am not crazy about, I personally would not put much stock into Baker or Kirk Cousins being available truly this offseason. They'll be free agents, but behind the scenes, their agents are going to have a deal worked out very quickly with their respective teams, and I believe both those guys will return. So, of the 5 more available free agent quarterbacks we looked at today, I would pick the first one, Gardner Minshew. Like, Gardner Minshew this season, I think showed us that he can be a starting quarterback in the NFL. Is he the Denver Broncos' number 1 target for 2024? Probably not. But Denver put themselves in a tough position when they decided to burn the bridges with Russell Wilson. And I don't know if they've got a great plan B option. So Gardner Minshew might be the next best guy. And listen, I know that might not be a super exciting thing to hear, but ultimately, this is what happens when you move on from Russell Wilson and there's not a clear backup plan in place. You might have to go to the free agency market and find a guy for at least the short term until you can figure out what you want to do long term at quarterback. That's going to do it for us on today's show. I appreciate every one of you that tuned in. If you have not subscribed, please go ahead and do so, and we'll see you all later.